Let me give you a proper introduction. He's an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, political activist. He wrote the screenplay for the film about Harvey Milk called Milk and helped overturn California's anti-gay marriage Proposition 8. His new book is what he's here to talk about and promote. It's fascinating and really inspiring and I think important. It's called Mama's Boy, a story from our Americas. Dustin Lance Black is here on Twitter, by the way, at @DLanceBlack. It's really great to meet you.
Yeah, very good to meet you.
The book is fascinating. Your life is fucking nuts. It's nuts. It's so original. It's so different.
Gosh.
And
you can say the F word on this show.
Anything you want.
Holy crap!
And so we have a lot to talk about. But also, I read you also wrote the screenplay for J. Edgar.
Yeah, for J.
Look
Edgar.
At that. How did you get
I did
that
a bunch
gig?
of stuff.
You've done stuff that didn't have anything to do with kind of activism or gay rights necessarily.
J. Edgar. I mean, it was as far as I can tell, was a closet case, and it was to me. Brian Grazer over at Imagine came to me with it and said, "Should we do the opposite of Milk? Should we do the mirror of Milk?" And I thought it was a great idea. Let's see how staying in the closet withers you. So it actually, to me, in my mind, it was very much related. Not as uplifting.
Yeah, no, of course, how staying in the closet withers you. Withers is an understatement because you knew when you were 6 and you were at times suicidal. And that's one of the biggest issues with LGBT youth is that they can't live their truth and they have to stay in it. You talk about it withering over time, but a lot of times they end their lives, young people.
Well, particularly in the Mormon faith, which is what I grew up in. And so if you're told from a very, very early age that you will never be able to love, and that if you do, the consequences where I'm from were, jail. You're either a criminal, mentally ill, going to hell. I mean, that's a lot for a little 6-year-old to carry, isn't it? And so for me, it was always, and what this book was about was how do you square loving the South, loving the place you came from, loving even the faith you came from, but not being able to be yourself there. So much shame being piled on you that you start to consider very dire solutions.
Well, how do you square it? But how do we realize in America right now, in the conversation that we're having everywhere, that life is not binary. Right. Things are not just conservative or liberal or black and white. I mean, you can be any kind of person with any kind of background and be very complex. I think that's what your book is really attempting to, in a way, explain the way that you grew up as a Mormon at the time you grew up, knowing you were gay at such a young age, and yet still loving your mother. Who was very strict about these things.
It's true. I mean, you read the book. I'm impressed.
It's a really, really good book for a lot of reasons, especially for someone who didn't live your life.
It's why the subtitle is A Story from Our Americas. And I'll tell you, when I pitched it, it was a story from 2 Americas. And I very quickly realized that was a lie and that I was buying into a narrative being fed to me by 24-hour news stations, by politicians. And I thought, we got to crack that open. There are not 2 Americas. There aren't 3 Americas. There's certainly not
130 million.
Yeah. An infinite variety, and we should embrace that. That is why life is interesting. We never say, I love waking up this morning because I get to do the same thing I did yesterday and eat the same thing I did, last week. It's about the infinite variety of things that make life worth living and interesting.
The different choices that you might make. Not even, I shouldn't say choices because we don't all have choices. Sometimes it's blamed. Oh, you made that choice. I'm like, nah, maybe I didn't. Maybe that choice was made for me. Tell us about your childhood, man. I mean, it is a fascinating story. Born in Texas?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was I was actually born in California, but didn't live there for long at all.
Okay.
So I grew up in Texas.
Got it.
By the time I was walking, I was in Texas.
Got it.
And so I grew up in Texas, grew up in the military, in the Mormon church. It was very, very conservative, the area that I was in. And then that sort of Mormon bubble you grow up in.
A lot of Mormons in Texas?
Not a ton, but they keep you sort of in an insular little community. Mm-hmm. And our family was all from Utah, as many good Mormons are. Yeah. And so I grew up in this place that felt quite familial, a safety in the storm. Mm-hmm. I grew up with a mom who was paralyzed from polio from a very young age. And the book goes into what she had to do to survive before I came along. And then the abandonment of my Mormon father, who I believe started taking steps into fundamentalist Mormonism and then vanished.
How old were you when he took off?
6 years old.
Oh my God.
So,
oh my God.
So a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old being raised by a paralyzed
two
mother.
brothers, yeah.
You get very, very close. I mean, that sounds like a challenge, and it was, but you get incredibly close. And you start to really understand the value of family, the value of community, even the value of the Mormon Church, which I would come to have to really disagree with, but they kept us alive in that time.
And
so
that is the inherent complexity that I'm trying to bring out and focus on. You're a Mormon kid. Your mom is in the military or works at a military
civil
base.
Service military. Yes,
and your dad is taken off at this point.
Yes.
And so all you have is each other. All you have is your family and your community, and yet it's, in your case, really crazy because that family and community is against the most important kind of core, one of the most important core parts of you, your sexual orientation, which is in many ways your identity.
Yeah, who you fall in love with.
Who you fall in love with, and when do you realize that you're attracted to boys?
At right around that same time. I think just before my father took off, I realized I had a crush on a kid down the street. And because I had words for it, right? There's plenty of words for what that was in the military, in Texas, in the South, in the Mormon Church. None of them are good. So I knew. I had definitions, and I knew that I was in trouble. And I would spend, really until I started writing this book, a good long time trying to figure out if I could maintain these relationships that were so dear to me and be true to who I am as an artist, as someone who is progressive, as a gay man. Could I still have a relationship with my family, with the South, with barbecue, with Jack Daniels, and with the Mormon Church? Could I do all of that? Could you square all that? And I think, a lot of this book was, some of it is the backstory, but then it starts moving forward. I eventually do go back to Texas. I do go back to Utah and meet with the Mormon Church. You see my attempts to build bridges in places that the 24-hour news shows say are impossible, where no bridges exist. And I do believe that this book helps strike down the fallacy that we can only exist within our own tribes, because I made some great, tight, new friendships with people in the Mormon Church and with my family in the South on the other side of writing this book.
And I think it's most important for someone who is, lives in a kind of one of the boxes, one of the categories of minorities that is able to do that as opposed to someone like me, who's a white, straight, non-religious guy. No one's targeting me. I've not had to overcome any kind of discrimination. And so I don't have to live with that paradox. I get really, really upset with right-wingers who, for any number of obvious reasons, Trump supporters for any number of obvious reasons, but it's not about my core. It's not that they hate me for who I am. It's different for you and so many people like you. And I don't know how you can. I don't know. I don't blame people who can't build those bridges.
Well, it's tough work, and it does take a little courage.
Why even try?
Well, and it also takes curiosity. Why try?
Sure.
Because I think that what we're seeing is, because we're being told this lie that politics is the highest plane there is of how you might define yourself, what party you're in, that it's starting to divide, you see, relationships, certainly families.
Yeah.
Once you start to divide families, communities, and a country,
yep,
that's incredibly dangerous. And I don't believe that's what's in the best interest of this country, certainly not community or families. So you have to try. And it's actually not that fucking hard. I'm going to use that word. It's not that difficult. It takes courage, and it takes utilizing your curiosity. Try your best to listen as much as you talk. Actually sit across from the person, have a meal, have a drink. And you start to see that people's preconceptions of who you are because of the boxes they think you live in start to melt away. Because you're sitting with them, you look at them in the eye, and you realize that there is a far higher plane than politics that we've been ignoring now for far too long.
I love that answer. That's a great answer. It's a tough question, but it's incredibly dangerous when we develop this tribal mentality. We've seen it here in this country before.
Yes.
I was just in Washington, D.C. I brought my daughters to D.C. for the first time, and we went to the World War II Museum, or rather memorial, but I guess my daughter was somewhat surprised to see how many more people died in the Civil War.
Yes.
And I thought about that for a while after seeing the Civil War memorial, or just looking up the statistics, I think. I was like, way more people died when it was brothers fighting brothers and cousins fighting across state borders than even died fighting the Nazis. Like, it's dangerous, as you said, and that's the reason to try.
It is, and the issues are important. I'm not trying to say that the issues that politics are trying to engage in aren't important. They are. But I think that the solution is not to take sides and to entrench yourselves. One of the things I've discovered in my film work and then in my political work is, and this is going to be very frustrating to a lot of my progressive political activist friends, do not come to that table expecting to utilize your facts and the Constitution and science and the law. They might be on your side. And
there goes the show.
You might fervently,
my show.
I know, you might fervently believe in them, but all that's going to get is the other side to dig their trenches deeper. If you want to build a bridge, if you want to create understanding, you need to come to the table with some personal stories. Tell some personal stories, hopefully of your own, maybe of other people if you don't have any of your own, and those can change a heart. Those can shift the way people feel about an issue, and that's the only way, I believe, to change a mind.
I love that answer, and I think it's certainly true of gay equality in this country, those personal stories, because I might really like a guy a lot as a coworker. I really admire him, I respect him. I don't know anything about his sexual orientation.
Yeah.
When I find, and I'm anti-gay, when I find out he's gay, I'm like, well, how can I still be anti-gay when that guy that I admire and respect so much is gay? I understand what you're saying about that, but how do you apply that argument using personal stories on an issue like climate change?
Well, I mean, that is, by the way, that is one of the big challenges of climate change, is that the most trying personal stories have yet to come. That we know this thing is coming, that is going to hurt families, that is going to affect lives.
He's happening now. People have died in America. Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina.
So I think
wildfires.
Whatever we can do on that issue to personalize it is going to help.
Okay.
It is a very difficult one.
Yeah.
But, sadly, and I say sadly, the facts and the science and the law and the Constitution don't typically work when you're doing cross-tribal debate. It really becomes, like you just described, a civil war, and people dig the trenches deeper. But as difficult as climate change is, and we have to tackle it, and we have to figure out how to tackle it better from a personal perspective, you most certainly can apply the idea of personal storytelling to other civil rights issues, to anti-Semitism in this country right now, to women's equality in this country right now. I want to hear those personal stories. And it's beholden upon us, the minorities, to tell them. It's too bad that we have to, but we have to.
Dustin Lance Black is sitting right across from me. He's obviously a very passionate and fascinating guy. His new book is really inspiring and I think very important. It's called Mama's Boy, A Story from Our Americas. Did you hear about this kid at BYU?
Which kid? What happened
the
at BYU?
valedictorian who came out during his speech?
I've heard of. There's been a few.
Can
of
I play
these.
a clip to get your response to it? Because
you
say there's a few of these. Obviously, it's Utah. It's Brigham Young University. The rules on that campus. We had Dan Reynolds of the Imagine Dragons in here. He went there, and I think he got kicked out of school for having sex with a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, the code is really, really strict there. But do we have that clip queued up? This is
Matt Easton.
Matt Easton.
Yes. Let's hear it. Yes.
He was giving his the commencement speech this year at an arena full of classmates for BYU. Take a listen. It's about 1 minute long.
As I'm sure many of you have felt, I recall countless times here at the Y where I have battled and fought in prayer with my Maker. It was in these quiet moments of pain and confusion that I felt another triumph. That of coming to terms not with who I thought I should be, but who the Lord has made me to be. As such, I stand before my family, friends, and graduating class today to say that I am proud to be a gay son of God.
Applause and cheering.
He's in an arena. Sorry about the audio.
I am not broken. I am loved and important to the plan of our great Creator. Each of us are. Thank you to my parents, to my friends, and my mentors here at BYU, who have offered support and helped me remember my divine potential here on this earth. 4 years ago, it would have been impossible for me to imagine that I would come out to my entire college. It is a phenomenal feeling, and it is a victory for me in and of itself.
I mean, what a tremendous amount of courage. I don't know if he came out entirely to everybody, didn't know, but nonetheless, the courage that takes, period, to your own family, much less at BYU at commencement.
Sure. in a faith that has a terrible history with LGBT equality, and really paid for Proposition 8, and has one of the worst statistics as a state for teen suicide.
Is that right?
Yes,
Utah, and that's attributed to
just the treatment of LGBT young people within that church. And though I hope people will read the story that's in this book about my journey back to the Mormon Church and the work that I did alongside some very brave people in Utah to start to have that conversation. And we started to have that conversation, and we did our best to do it in a familial way, and to tell the stories of our families and hear the stories of their families. And the church is moving. It's not moving fast enough, but just this past week, the new prophet of the church said that gay couples are no longer apostate, and they would baptize the children of gay couples. Now, that's not all the way there, let's be honest. Right. But those sort of signals from the church can give a little bit of hope to young people who might be considering taking their own lives. And it's in this the speech you just played, and there's also a young girl who came out within her church while bearing her testimony. I mean, it does take courage. I think they're telling their own personal story. I didn't hear him talking about politics up there on stage. Right. And that is so effective.
He phrased it, I think, gay son of God.
Yes.
Pete Buttigieg's argument is, if you have a problem with my sexuality, take it up with my maker, basically. Sure. Do you think that's an effective argument? I find that a very effective argument. God made me this way. Whatever I am, God made me.
Well, I think it's an incredibly effective argument, also because it's true. And when you hear it from someone like Pete, Mayor Pete, who I adore, or this young man who just came out in front of his school, you can do a litmus test on their truth just looking them in the eye. It's those personal stories told in a firsthand fashion that can really change hearts. I think if we want to talk about Mayor Pete, I think his candidacy is a true inspiration. And frankly, no matter where it goes or what happens with it, he has already saved lives.
That's an really interesting point that he can take with him, the rest of his life, no matter what happens.
What we don't want as any people on the planet. I'm a dad now.
Oh, you are? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I have a little 10-month-old at
home.
Oh,
my goodness. Congratulations. I saw your husband is like a diver.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be away. You're on the book tour, and you got a 10-month-old. But he's written a book about something like never be hungry or sleepy. Fascinating guy. Anyway,
he's the big star in the family.
Is that right? You're being modest.
But what you know this as a dad. What you don't want is for your children, because of who they are inherently, to have limitations put on them.
Right.
That's debilitating.
Right.
I mean, for a long time, we as LGBT people were told we couldn't love who we wanted to love. And in many parts of the world, that's still true. Now, with the candidacy of someone like Mayor Pete, all of a sudden the presidency looks like a possibility. All of a sudden, there's that ceiling is cracking open.
Yeah.
It's not cracking as quickly as it needs to for women and for LGBT people. But it's starting to show cracks, and that gives hope, and so I do think his candidacy is life-saving.
I think that the most important part of the book is that you talk so much about your mother and the complexity of that relationship and her story and your family's story. And your mother was a very devout Mormon woman, and tell us about how you came out to her, because that's a very difficult moment and really, I think, important story in your life and in the book that many people can relate to.
Well, I have to thank, this is going to sound funny, but I have to thank Bill Clinton for signing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Which
it's a weird thing to thank him for.
It is a very strange thing to thank him for. But
the law that said you can be gay, but you can't tell anybody in military, but you can't tell anybody.
So I was home for Christmas, and I was probably 21 years old, and I was out already back in LA at UCLA. Just starting to date, but I was definitely not out at home. That was too frightening, too dangerous. And I knew where my mom stood. And she came into my room the night of Christmas and just wanted to chat. That's what we did. We were so close.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd raised her as much as she had raised me.
Because she had polio, and paralyzed, and had all kinds of,
We were tied. And so she started going on and on about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the fact that Bill Clinton would sign it. And she was angry for the opposite reasons I was inside. She thought these gay people, who we'd been told had horns hidden under their hair and would, certainly be going to hell or mentally ill, were going to be allowed in her military that she was so proud of. And because I said nothing, I was just sitting on the floor, my back up against the wall, and she just took my silence as agreement, and she kept going. And my mom, boy, I mean, we come from a family of storytellers, so she could tell a story with passion, and she just kept getting more and more passionate. And all of a sudden, I mean, now she was talking about me. She was talking about my friends. She was talking about people I loved and cared for. And I just remember that first tear hitting my cheek. I get tearful thinking about it. But I said a prayer, might surprise people, that I wouldn't show anything that might lead her to believe I was gay. And a Southern mom, can read those tears like tea leaves. And I just remember the silence in the room and looking up into her eyes, and then 21 years of tears were coming out, and she knew. I never said the word. And she just asked me, why? Why would you choose this? And I looked, I remember this was probably only the second time in my life I had really noticed and looked at her legs, which were incredibly thin, in metal braces and with her crutches behind her. And I'd never once pointed them out in my entire life. We weren't allowed to acknowledge that they existed. And I did. I said, why did you choose those? And she began to understand then. It would take years to find acceptance, but she began to understand then her great difference, which had been her window into love and empathy. Let me tell you, her paralysis grew the biggest heart you'd ever found in a person.
Is that right?
Yeah. And my being gay, I think, did the same thing for me.
Do you think ever, not to psychoanalyze, but do you think she was baiting you with the rant? Did she have any idea? Was she completely shocked?
No, she was completely shocked, which speaks to the blindness of parents sometimes. Because I had a New Kids on the Block Joey Joe McIntyre collage on my wall. Like, I mean, come on, it was boy band 1980. It was very.
I'm trying very hard. I'm a very gay straight guy. I'm very feminine, but I did not get into the boy band thing.
Yeah, I was really into it. I had permed my hair. I was in theater class. It was all very. I tried to conceal at one point the Joey Joe McIntyre New Kids on the Block poster with the Paula Abdul poster. I thought that would do it, and so I don't know. I don't know how she could.
But parents don't. It's as well as they know you. They don't want to believe that what things they don't want to believe. I suppose. I'm
going to ruin a bit of the book, but there was a bigger surprise than that coming in our family, and that was my big brother, who was an auto mechanic at Sears and loved NASCAR, and he killing animals and watching cars go around in circles. He had a little surprise for my mom as well a few years later.
Yeah.
And my brother, who I always thought we were oil and water, had a lot more in common than I thought.
Do you think you seem like I look at your career and I look at your activism, I look at reading this book and getting to know you and then just talking to you, you seem like a guy who is so well adjusted, so mature, highly intelligent, extremely successful in a business where very few people have success. Screenwriting, I mean, why would you even try? You can't support yourself in Hollywood, isn't it? But do you think, I always look at guys like that and I wonder, but what about the damage? You said 21 years. I mean, what about the damage? What do you say about yourself, and what do you say about other people who grew up in a type of atmosphere that you grew up in? A lot of people our age-ish, that would be. It's changing for good, I think. How do you undo that? Do you still live with it? Do you have to? Is it a constant struggle, or have you figured it out?
Well, I think you put it to good use is what I would do. And I mean, I guess I'm grateful and fortunate to have grown up with a mother who had a tremendous difference herself, and people looked at her like she was a freak. I mean, she did. She had a very twisted spine from scoliosis. She walked like a pendulum, beautiful face, but she was incredibly different looking. And I learned from her what it took to survive as someone who was quite different. And so I guess from an early age,
she unintentionally prepared you in a way.
She did. She put steel into my bones, sometimes quite intentionally. Sometimes once I remember You know, she's also responsible for getting me out of the film business for half a decade, which I'm just now stepping back into, because after that Oscars ceremony, where I got up on stage and made a speech promising federal equality, which was a sort of a big no-no to say within the gay movement. It was too soon, it was too much, and it was a big promise to make to little kids in Texas and Utah. And she set me down before she got on a plane back home to Virginia, and she said, you know, Lancer, a promise is a sacred thing. And so what are you going to do? And I just remember going, oh, I've just made a promise to help deliver something that means I won't have time to make movies for a while. And she said, that's right. That's right.
And you're now, I think, a civil rights hero. I mean, in that movement, you did as much as almost any other individual to create awareness and to resource and to bring attention to this issue.
Well, I will only object because I'm a student of LGBT rights, and I lean more towards the L than the G on this, and it's really a we thing. I can't
I couched
take that
it.
much.
I
can't
couched
take
it
that
in
much
as
credit.
much as any other individual, though, and I think that's important because I think it's also important that we look at our civil rights heroes. Mostly now, we look at the civil rights movement in the '60s and Black equality, and we look at people like Dr. King and John Lewis and so many other amazing women as well, and we give them the credit that they deserve. And I think that it's important that people see gay rights as civil rights, similar to the civil rights movement of the '60s, and I think it's important that those who risked a lot and spent a lot of time get the credit that they deserve, and duly in your case. Because
I'm just going to take this moment of privilege, this opportunity to say you're drawing parallels and between these movements, and I think that's a critical part of the puzzle of how we get back to getting that pendulum of progress moving forward again. Those coalitions between minority groups are the critical and necessary component for progress. And when we lose sight of our interconnectedness, when we start to say, well, I'm a part of this community and I'm going to fight hard for it, and good luck to them in the women's movement or in the civil rights movement, those divisions are how we're defeated. Those divisions among us as minorities and people treated differently under the law for our differences, that is what pluralities of the powerful, these days usually white straight men, can take advantage of. Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I'm probably out of bounds for me to say, inappropriate for me to say, but I think what we're seeing a little bit of, and we know a lot more of, is those alliances between Jews and Muslims in America, and Christians, but especially Jews and Muslims. And I've seen some of that, but with these attacks on mosques and synagogues, I mean, I hope to see a lot more of that. I'm not a member of either community, so far be it for me to tell anybody what to do or how to lead their movement. But I'm very inspired to see those two groups, which have a lot of history, coming together when they do and supporting each other's.
It has to happen. I speaking of Utah, in the Mormon Church, in my life, when these young kids out in Utah said that they wanted to win equality for gay people in Utah, which is a tough place, and I thought, well, how are you going to do that? That's so difficult. I thought they were so brilliant. They said, we're going to go out on the first snowfall and we're going to shovel the driveways of the seniors' Mormons' homes. And we're not asking for anything in return. We're just going to wear our gayest clothing and our gayest buttons we have. And we're going to let them know that we understand that they need help in this community.
I don't want any gay people shoveling my driveway.
You don't?
No, that's a straight...
By the way...
It's a really interesting tactic, because can you imagine being upset about someone helping you?
I didn't hear a single story about anyone being upset.
Right. I can't. It would be hard to imagine that.
But that's the kind
it humanizes people. It's very important.
It's the coalition building that won the race for Harvey Milk, that has always proven effective, and that in what Obama called the circular firing squad recently,
right.
where progressives are taking aim at each other.
Right.
Dangerous, or what I sometimes call the discrimination Olympics, meaning we have different groups arguing that they are treated worse than others, as if there's some reward for that. I think these are the divisions that are being sown, I believe influenced by outside forces, being sown to divide us so that we can be conquered. It's the oldest play in the playbook.
It really is, and if you don't see it...
Don't buy into it.
Right.
You do not get an award. I love that people are investigating who they are and are being vocal about how they're being discriminated against, but you do not get a reward at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the award is for building a bridge.
Mama's Boy is a really great book. I think people should go. I know people should go buy it. I know that you'll love reading Dustin's story and following all of his activism and supporting him in all of it. Dustin Lance Black, Mama's Boy, A Story from Our America is a really important edition at a very important time. If you want to stay for Dr. Ruth, you are welcome to do it, but I got to take a break now. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.